1 year ago, August 14th, 2023, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis made history when she and her office handed down dozens of indictments charging the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, and 17 of his Republican allies of engaging in a criminal gang-like, organized crime-like attempt to overturn Georgia's 2020 election results. That was 1 year ago today, August 14th, 2024. I'm Tim Darnell, and that's one of the political headlines that we're following for you in this edition of Political Update here on Atlanta News First. Here are some of the other headlines that we're following. Donald Trump was indicted 1 year ago today, and the office that he is seeking to reclaim this year in 2024, that being the President of the United States, he and Vice President Kamala Harris have agreed to at least one debate with possibly more on the horizons. The Democratic National Convention is set for next week. Georgia parents are hoping that Georgia Governor Kemp will reconsider his position on a federal free and reduced meals program, and in Decatur, an historic school board inauguration took place just last night. We're now joined by our legal expert and analyst and outstanding anchor here on Atlanta News First and AtlantaNewsFirst.com, Joy Lim Nakrin.
What an introduction. Thank you, Tim.
We're happy to have you here, Joy. You know, our top story is today, it's been 1 year since Fani Willis handed down a series of historic indictments against the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump. 17 of his other co-defendants, 4 of those have already reached plea deals with the Fulton County DA's office. That leaves Donald Trump and 13 remaining co-defendants. And yet, we're here 1 year later. The trial or the case has been just plagued by tons of controversies, a lot of which you would expect in such a high-profile indictment against a former Commander-in-Chief of the United States. And yet, it doesn't seem like Fani Willis is any closer to getting Donald Trump into a courtroom than she was a year ago. And tell us what's going on with the case right now.
And Tim, I would add, some might even argue she's further from getting Mr. Trump into a courtroom here in Fulton County, because just a reminder, because it's been a year since that indictment came down, but since that time, of course, there were the revelations of the now admitted affair that Ms. Willis had with her former special prosecutor, Nathan Wade, and it essentially ended up tainting the entire case. So as it stands right now, the case is with the State Court of Appeals, and they're determining one of the key questions is whether Ms. Willis should even remain on the case as the lead prosecutor. Remember that initially the lower court judge, Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee, ruled that Ms. Willis would be allowed to stay on the case if Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade resigned or was removed, and subsequently he did resign, but Judge McAfee ruled that Ms. Willis could continue on, and that was after an appeal filed by Trump's team to essentially have her removed. Well, clearly the Trump team didn't like that ruling, and then they brought it up to the Court of Appeals, which is where it's sitting right now, and that question is being reviewed, right? Whether Ms. Willis stays on the case or not, that's one question. Another question is whether the indictments stick, because of course the Trump team has been pushing even through the lower court, Fulton County Superior Court, to have all of the indictments thrown out. And as you mentioned, initially there were 18 suspects, or defendants, I should say, who were charged in this massive, Georgia election interference case under largely the RICO Act. But again, it's been challenged really every step of the way, first with the Fulton County Superior Court and now with the Georgia Court of Appeals because, again, Mr. Trump's team didn't like that ruling that the indictments would stick and that Ms. Willis was going to remain as prosecutor. Of course, we know that delays are often a tactic used by defense teams. Time is certainly on their side if they can create delays because memories fade, right? And that can affect testimony. And there's kind of a momentum loss in terms of building a case from a prosecution standpoint. So, yeah, here we are a year later, and you say, not any closer to actually getting into a courtroom with that. Some might say even further away.
Now, you mentioned the RICO Act. This is the second. Fulton County has two very high-profile RICO cases going on right now. One with the global superstar rapper known as Young Thug, and also with the Donald Trump RICO indictment. Tell us what a RICO indictment is. What is the RICO Act?
Racketeering and organized crimes is essentially what is targeted in the RICO Act. And it's essentially a sort of broader statute that allows prosecutors a larger scope in terms of what kind of evidence they can gather, what sort of evidence they can introduce in court. The scope of the discovery process is broader as well. So it does give broader reach. It enables them to go after multiple defendants for multiple crimes and essentially try to connect the dots. But what many defense attorneys argue is that RICO cases are overly complex, they're overly broad, and what we've seen in the YSL trial is that it is historically long, because again, now we have 6 defendants in that trial, but that was whittled down from, I believe, well over 20. It's been so long now, but we saw that in this case, in the Trump case, there were 18 original co-defendants, and as you mentioned, 4 of the original co-defendants have pleaded out. But if and when this does actually go to trial, what is this trial going to look like? I mean, with YSL, the jury selection itself was more than a year, right? It was about a year. So, we're looking at a very long process, and again, judicial efficiency is very important, not just in terms of the efficiency of how the courts run, but in terms of the effectiveness of arguing a case as a prosecutor, because, again, memories fade, witnesses move away, witnesses pass away. So information is difficult to preserve and becomes more difficult to preserve. Evidence becomes more difficult to preserve as time goes on. And we've heard that Mr. Trump actually has been very vocal in saying that Jeffrey Williams, a.k.a. Young Thug, has been treated very unfairly by, essentially the Fulton County Superior Court system in this RICO case.
Well, we may be sitting here 1 year from now, Joy, talking about the latest developments in Donald Trump's Georgia indictment. Donald Trump has obviously also become the first convicted felon ever to seek election to the U.S. presidency, and he is running against the soon-to-be official Democratic nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris. He and the Harris campaign have agreed to at least one debate coming up next month in September, and here's a report on that development from CBS News.
Vice President Harris and former President Donald Trump have agreed to a face-off on stage next month.
I think it's very important to have debates.
At a lengthy news conference Thursday, Trump suggested 3 debates, while Harris confirmed she'll take part in at least one, scheduled for September 10th.
I'm looking forward to it and hope he shows up.
During Trump's news conference, he issued a series of dire warnings.
We have a lot of bad things coming up. You could end up in a depression of the 1929 variety, which would be a devastating thing. Took many years, took decades to recover from it. In my opinion, we're very close to a world war. We have people that don't know how to handle it.
As he continued to personally attack Harris.
Kamala, who, by the way, is worse than Biden, and she's actually not as smart.
Harris and running mate Tim Walz campaigned Thursday in Michigan alongside members of the United Auto Workers.
The true measure of the strength of a leader is not based on who you beat down.
It's based on who you lift up.
Harris and Walz campaign in Arizona Friday as they continue their battleground state blitz, while Trump holds a rally and fundraiser in Montana. Willie James Inman, CBS News, Washington.
That was a report from CBS National Correspondents, and we're now joined by Doug Reardon, the hardest working political reporter in the United States. I can say that quite unambiguously. Doug, you're headed to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. You covered the RNC in Milwaukee. What are you looking for in your coverage next week, live from Chicago?
Well, I think the biggest thing is going to be the sentiment and the energy among the delegates. They're the ones who are actually theoretically already have chosen Kamala Harris and Tim Walz as their ticket. And so I want to know how people are feeling about that, given all of the recent switch-ups that we've had, going from President Joe Biden now to Vice President Kamala Harris as the nominee. This is a convention that's going to be very different than ones that we've seen from either the RNC or the DNC, maybe in the last 40 years, because they are really a formality nowadays, with primaries and caucuses already kind of figuring out who the nominees and the tickets are going to be. This was different this year. We were talking just about 3 weeks up until the start of this convention. There were still some questions over who was actually going to be on the ticket. And so this is going to be very real. This is going to be very functional as a convention for the intended purposes that we really don't see a whole lot of anymore. And so I think it's going to be a different year. This is my first DNC, so I don't really have anything to compare it to. And certainly the RNC was really interesting this year in and of itself alone. So I'm just excited to be there, get the feeling of what these delegates are feeling like, what some of these party officials, especially the ones from Georgia, are feeling, because now Harris is kind of closing that polling gap with Trump here in our very key swing state. And so I'm interested to talk to people from Georgia and see get a finger on the pulse of what they're feeling and how much confidence they have going into November.
Well, it's going to be a historic election this November. Georgia is obviously the unquestioned battleground state. We can say, we say this all the time in our coverage and in our morning news meetings, that you win Georgia, you win the White House. So we'll be looking forward to Doug Reardon's coverage of the Democratic National Convention every day of next week. During the DNC coverage, we will be streaming live here at 11 a.m., featuring our own Brendan Keefe, Chief Investigator, and Doug Reardon's live reports from Chicago. A little closer to home, our own Abby Kasouras has a report on Georgia parents who are sincerely hoping that Georgia Governor Brian Kemp will reconsider his position on a very popular federal program from the U.S. Department of Agriculture called Sunbucks, in which Georgia families qualify for free or reduced meals during the summer months when the kids are out of school. Here is Abby Kasouras' package.
Okay, I need you to be quiet for me, please.
Tasha Miller is a parent to 3 kids. Her school-age daughter is one of 1.2 million Georgia students to receive free school breakfast and lunch. Without those meals during the summertime, she says she's been asking for help.
We're utilizing a food pantry right now, and we are able to go once a week. I know a lot of food pantries don't have that option.
Sunbucks is a federal program offering students who already qualify for free or reduced lunch during the school year $120 per summer. Miller says it means she could afford to buy more meat and produce for her family. She signed a petition with more than 3,000 other parents, calling on governors in holdout states to approve the funding. Democrat leaders writing to Georgia Governor Brian Kemp to urge him to do the same.
These federal resources to help families feed their kids are available for the state of Georgia. And what I'd urge is that the governor accept these federal resources to help families across Georgia afford food in the summertime.
In July, Kemp's office sent us this statement defending his skepticism of the program, citing concerns over the lack of nutritional requirements and a lack of fiscal sustainability.
And all we're asking is that you put our kids and our families first.
Abby Kasouras, Atlanta News First.
Now here's a very unusual concept. Imagine a school board actually having high school students or students in their public school system actually sitting as members of the Board of Education. It's quite a unique concept, one that you kind of wonder why it hasn't already been adopted before. Well, last night, the City School Board of Decatur inaugurated its very first school board member who is actually a pupil in the Decatur public school system. Here is Bridget Spencer's report.
It is a special day in the City Schools of Decatur.
Bridging the gap between elected board members and students. That's what Sophia Delana is planning to do.
Sometimes it feels like if you're not on SGA or if you're not in a position of some sort of power within the school, that you don't really have a voice.
She's the newest board member and the first ever student elected to the City Schools of Decatur Board of Education.
I felt that there was a little bit of a disconnect between the two groups, and so having a representative on the Board of Education and a student representative could bring more of a voice.
She was sworn in at Tuesday's meeting. Delana is a senior at Decatur High School. She ran a campaign and was chosen by her peers.
The school board is the one representative that is elected that really speaks on behalf of children. So to have a school board representative that is a student, what best way to truly amplify their voice?
Board Chairman James Herndon sees this as a great opportunity to hear student concerns right from the source.
Hey, what are you hearing? What's happening in the actual high school? You're no longer playing hearsay.
Her term will be 1 year, after which her apprentice, Nia Batra, will become the new board member, continuing the brand new tradition.
To represent every single person is my goal.
Bridget Spencer, Atlanta News First.
A reminder to watch Political Update each Wednesday at 1:30 p.m., streaming live here from the First Alert Desk from the Atlanta News First Midtown headquarters and our live studios. Also, we will be covering the Democratic National Convention all next week from 11 a.m. until noon, as well as our weekly political update Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Stay with Atlanta News First for all the latest news and information regarding Georgia's battleground state status in the 2024 presidential election.